Souls for the Golden Throne!
I have cast your bones in great Lurgod's name! Ammo crate!
It's this way, you carking lumberfoots!
Darktide, it's finally here, and before we get into the review, I want to talk a little bit about the early access / open beta part of the game because it's worth talking about.
Granted a great opportunity to die in service to the beneficent Emperor!
Darktide is if Vermintide and 40k had a baby. Almost a premature baby judging by how the early access went for most people. I'm not here to rant, but it probably will come off like that. However, I'm going to try and come from a middle ground and talk about the early access / open beta. There was a bit of a war going on in the community during that time, which is always a shame on a launch of a game because it's meant to be a fun time. Many people defending the game saying the developers were doing their best, and others saying this is unacceptable a few weeks from launch with the amount of issues. There was many negative reviews even before the launch of the game of people complaining about optimization and bugs, even to the point where some big boy YouTubers said they won't even review the game due to the issues. Like a lot of people, I have to agree, this is definitely a Fatshark launch. Of course, there were trolls on both sides. Fatshark should know by now they're not the best at launching games, and I thought they had learnt that with the Darktide closed beta. Perfect, get people to test the game, fix bugs, ready to launch. I think where this falls apart is when you have a so-called early access but it's a pre-order beta stage. In my emails it's been advertised as a pre-order beta, however on Facebook and Twitter it's advertised as early access. This is just bad marketing for a game. I have no problem with an open beta, even a beta that you have to prepay to engage in, but using these certain words like beta and early access together feel like a scapegoat for the game. So when you do complain, you're told it's a beta when it was advertised to you as early access. On the flip side, Fatshark have made it very clear you can refund the game from Steam during that time, and hopefully Steam did allow that. Taking 2 steps back, there's people who've had to buy new hardware just to run the game, even though they meet the requirements on Steam. I knew someone who had to buy more RAM just to play. Personally, the beta was fine for me other than the odd crash here and there, and I have to suck Fatshark's fin a little bit to commend them that they had the option to rejoin games. There also was some funny bugs as well, like having 6 people in a party playing, also finding a way to get around the achievement system. I also had one bug where if I was lagging, using my ability would fix it, which made no sense. However, I do feel like I'm obligated to give a voice to the people who were shit on during the alpha, and it wasn't great for everyone. Don't fret Darktide fans, you'll be happy to know that I'll treat the early access as a beta, meaning it won't affect my review. But after launch, if there is bugs, it's fair game. Now you might see some gameplay in this review that has the tag in the top left that says it was recorded before release. I assure you that I'm only going to use footage that is relevant in the final game. So if they change something on launch that was in the beta, I'm not going to use that footage. With all that being said, let's get into this carking review. Man, I love the word carking, I'm going to use it more often. Darktide, what is it? Almost. Ever since Vermintide 1 and 2, people have been screaming for a 40k version. The reason being that Vermintide did a great job of immersing you in the world of Warhammer Fantasy, from the environments, lore, dialogue, I could go on. It was co-op so you could experience the game together with your friends and bring new people into the IP. Yes, it had its problems with the loot system in 1, which I personally actually quite liked because you could spend 400 hours playing the game and never get a good weapon for your favourite character, and the god-awful launch of Vermintide 2, which I'm sure many of you remember. Darktide is a first-person, 4-player co-op hack/purge the mutant game where you get to live out your fantasies of 40k without needing to cosplay or spending so much money on plastic crack that you're forced to become an actor to afford your addiction. Whilst the game is similar to the Vermintide franchise, it does differentiate itself in a number of ways, the most prevalent being range weapons. In Vermintide, most of the time, range weapons were used to deal with specials. Darktide brings them more into the light of being a necessary tool to utilise in combat. The footage you're actually seeing behind me is Damnation difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty in the game, and there are many parts where melee weapons are just not an option and you need to poke with your range weapons. Range having a bigger role in the game allows for many more of the iconic 40k weapons such as the Ripper gun, Las gun, and the almighty Bolt gun, which is a fucking beast.
Where's the gold? The gold!
But for those of you who don't know, it's Warhammer. Let's get into the lore.
Like a whole fragging army of Goulamans!
Okay, that's fucking brilliant.
Goulamans!
Goulamans, the whole fucking army of Goulamans.
Darktide takes place on the planet of Atoma Prime in the hive city of Tertium. A hive city is honestly the UK, but if we all live together in one city. You've got the king, royals, and whoever is in power in the upper hives looking down on us peasants. You then have the odd police officer as an RBT's trooper keeping everything in check. And lastly, Britain's finest in the underhives.
You little slug.
The game takes place during the Indomitus Crusade, which means Katie is dead, Gilliman's knocking around, and the Primaris Space Marines are all the talk. The point of view of the game is from generic humans or guardsmen in the 40k universe. I'm afraid you're going to have to uninstall the game and read Gaunt's Ghost first before you can fully appreciate it. The books describe perfectly the horror of 40k from a human perspective, like being chainsawed in half or being killed by friendly fire, but it's worth it. Humans messing with things they're not supposed to, and the reality that if you kill something chaos-like, you're most likely going to be as well due to corruption. It's brilliant. One thing that Darktide does very well with the lore is integrating it into parts of the game that make sense, like upgrades for weapons being done by a tech priest, the names of weapon tiers with mastercrafted being the best. Selecting a mission isn't generic, but a visual representation of the hive. Starting or ending a mission via a Valkyrie instead of just being there straight away is great. By far though, what I believe they need recognition for is the tutorial, because it's genius. Instead of just a generic training room, you go to the Psycharium with Sephine, which is where a Psyker probes your mind and brings you into a tutorial to show you how to play, which is honestly described very well and also shows different difficulties. Of course, with lore comes dialogue and voice lines. Whilst you're playing, the group will talk about little parts of the lore here and there to keep your mind wandering, and it does a shit ton of world building. There will be conversations about the manufactorium you're fighting in, questioning whether the workers finished their shift before getting brutally murdered, which just shows even if you are being invaded by a Chaos God's cult, you need to finish your 9 to 5. There's discussions about mutants, the Godoldkin Index, Ratling's being hinted as a new character, which I actually did make a speculation video on which I unlisted, but you can find it. They go even deeper to talk about the Age of Apostasy, the Battle for Lion's Gate on Terra, and how many Custodes died. I'm pretty sure it's heresy to mention the word Custodes and fell in battle in the same sentence. I think what really demonstrates the horror of 40k is a Medicaid servitor asking for help, saying their mind is floating away. It's just so creepy. Of course, there are too many voice lines talking about lore to cover, but those are the ones I thought would be cool to mention for now. Anyway, let's get into those spoilers, and you've been fucking warned. Darktide opens up on the rejects of society, criminals, or people who have ended up in a bad place on board a prison ship, the Tancred Bastion, and it gets attacked by some traitor guard trying to save their best mate. Aww. You escape your cell and help a prison guard called Zola to fight and get out. She sees worth in you, so decides to offer you the opportunity to become an acolyte for an Inquisitor. If you've ever watched Red Dwarf, you're essentially playing as the Canaries, sent into the most smeggiest of situations to see if it's safe for the important people to come. It's essentially a kill crazy game.
Yeah, it's got like big teeth and claws and like loads of heads. Yeah, great! Here we go! Hello! Yeah!
You can play as an Ogren, a Guardsman,
We can't hold! Run for your lives!
a Zealot,
Skulls for the golden!
and a Psyker.
Witness your doom!
The game gives you options to make a backstory for your character, from homeworld, when your dad left you as a child, what career you got without GCSEs, and the moment you realised you were living in the hellscape universe that is 40k. Now there are a bunch of these that will change depending on your class, home, etc. that will take you to a final result of what your backstory is. As far as I know, this doesn't change the gameplay in any way, unless you pick the voice actor from Cadia that will just complain about Cadia. But all of this is a nice nod to 40k lore from all the options you can choose, which I love seeing, and having a backstory for a character gives a personal feeling.
You face Lord Horik Canorum, son of High King Valeric Canorum.
After the prison, you board Inquisitor Grendel's ship, which is your hub, and this is where you meet one of the people in charge of you, Morrow.
Ah, so the next step?
You want to watch me have a wank? It'll cost you a tenner.
Before your first assignment, you must go for a briefing with the Inquisitor. She gives you an overview of the mission, but I think this really showcases some nice little details. From the Inquisitor being kept confidential, prisoners not looking directly towards the hologram to show respect or being scared, and lastly the chanting, "I am a warrior," showing that they believe the Emperor is with them. After that cutscene, this is where the story falls apart for me. There are no story-focused missions, no final boss like Rasnid and Death Rattler. The only cutscenes you get introduce new shops like weekly rewards and upgrades that you get at certain levels. There is an underlying story about an imposter on the ship, which when you reach level 30 is revealed to be Karking Nobody, and that's it. The story had involvement from many GW writers, such as Dan Abnett, Erin Dembski-Bowden, John French, and I believe Matt Ward as well, so many people who understand this universe far better than anyone else. Now, the story is carking basic. Even I could have written it, which is saying something, but I believe the writers were brought on for world building and narrative, such as the premise, the environments, the life of the universe, and just the little details that other writers would miss. I think they put a lot of this into the conversations again, since they talk about the Emperor, the Inquisitor we're serving under, the Morning Star, how badly Atoma Prime is screwed, the Valkyrie pilot, Hadron the Tech Priest, which does help sort of build the story. It's also nice to know that we're officially part of the Ordo Hereticus. It's just sad there wasn't enough budget to have a brief story or campaign go along with it. I find in game you don't get much enjoyment from the story or characters, but you get a lot from the roleplay.
But Ogren's scared of tight spaces.
I will burn you alive, mutant.
I don't want to get in transport. Scary.
Come on there, big fella. You can do it, can't you? Just look into my eyes. Just look into Steve's eyes.
You'll get a sticker of bravery. A medal of bravery. You can do it.
Scared.
I'll hold your hand.
The commissar will give you a medal. For bravery.
Go on.
No.
Just get in the fucking jump ship. I swear to fucking God.
Let's talk about gameplay. Darktide's combat is the thing that's going to keep you coming back and playing the game. If you don't like it, there's no point even bothering. Understanding your movement controls, how to dodge enemies, and when to utilise your ammo and abilities is what separates a good player from a pro. And the skill ceiling is carking high. All melee weapons in the game have their own attack patterns with left and right click. Some are better for hordes, single enemies, and armoured ones. On top of that, some weapons have a special ability like piercing armour, a parry, revving a chainsword or power weapon, and many more. It's about finding what you like. For example, you might take the Thunder Hammer. Its left click is better for single targets, its right click is better for hordes, and its special is a heavy charged attack. Or you might take the Katachan Combat Blade or UK Simulator, where left click is better for hordes, right click is better for armor piercing, and your special is a rocky uppercut. One strength and weakness of Darktide is its combat statistics. There are many perks, traits, percentages, and skill tree builds you can go for each character. On one side, it allows you to fully customize a character to how you want to play, for example a quick bleed build, or a range Ogren, or a zealot that's indestructible. I mean, my hammer swings recharge my toughness on each hit. But it's an endless rabbit hole that you could spend ages diving into, and for a new player it can be a bit overwhelming and the UI isn't always clear. Darktide's combat system runs on a weak spot model, where you need to focus unarmoured parts of enemies, or if available to do so, their head. The four classes each have their own abilities, skill trees, grenades, and signature weapons tied to them. For example, the Zealot gets access to an Eviscerator, stun grenades, and the ability to charge in. I love that the Ogren just throws an Amazon parcel at its enemies. As you go through the map, you'll be doing multiple objectives leading up to the main one for you being there. This can be scanning bodies, killing captains, retrieving items, or hacking systems. This is a massive improvement on Vermintide, since the missions you do have a nice variety between them. On top of that, if you change the difficulty, add grims or tomes, or a special condition like ventilation purge or lights out, it doesn't feel bland at all. Darktide has a great selection of enemies for both melee and range that fill a bunch of roles. Poxwalkers are chaff, dogs, mutants and trappers restrict movement, flamers, poxbursters and scab bombers deny areas, snipers play the role of being the biggest cunt in the game, and then there's a few enemies thrown in with shields and armors to tank. The bosses are beautiful, and I dread to think how long it takes to unwrap a Beast of Nurgle. But I do have issues with the bosses. In Vermintide, a skilled player could solo a boss, but the bosses like the Demon Host don't reward skill and they are impossible to solo. I mean, where the hell's Eisenhorn when you need him? The Beast of Nurgle's animation and telegraph attacks are not always clear, meaning you can be grabbed out of nowhere, and it also struggles to get any damage on players. The Plague Ogre is probably the one I like the most due to being the most similar to the Rat Ogre, having telegraphed attacks. One thing I don't understand is why there's no reward for killing bosses. In Vermintide, loot dice was an incentive to actually try and kill bosses. In this, there's nothing. Now, I might get some hate for this, but honestly, I don't care at this point. I feel like I need to talk about Fatshark's Regression in Darktide. I could be someone who says the game is brilliant, sucking Fatshark's dick with a sponsored review, but I'm not going to do that. I'm also not going to name names. One video I highly recommend you check out is WizFish's video on Darktide. His video is very well done and probably the most honest review of Darktide you'll see. Don't get me wrong, the game is fully playable and enjoyable, but it feels like we've gone back to square one with Fatshark, and having the 40k IP sort of glances over the things that have been missed. I do feel they've gone backwards with the number of classes available. Vermintide 2 launched with 4 characters and 3 careers you could choose from. That's pretty bad when you compare them. Vermintide's careers were one of the key parts of player progression in the game to keep player retention early. They gave you a sense of achievement as you leveled up, switching playstyles. Without this, it's just weapons and the skill tree. Whilst you play, you'll collect upgrading and crafting materials such as diamantine, which you can't even use yet on crafting because the publishers decided it would be far more better to spend their budget on a premium currency shop on launch than a crafting system. Yeah. Let's be honest, as soon as they put a Creed cosmetic in there, everyone's going to throw money at it, me included.
Money!
One thing that does disappoint me is there's no stat screen after you finish a mission. I like bullying my mates. There's also no private lobbies. Currency and weekly rewards are not shared between characters. You can't choose a particular mission if you have a weekly objective for that mission. You have to wait till rotation. This is also the same if you want a certain type of weapon. You have to wait till it rotates into the shop. There's no restrictions to stop idiots who are level 3 joining tier 5 missions with you. There's also no XP gain after max level, like giving you commendation chests. There's no unstuck option, there's loading screens between switching characters and the shops, which was never there in Vermintide. Bots don't have your gear when you're playing alone, and there's no commands for them either. It's just bad. Obviously, if you take Darktide as it is without any prior knowledge of Vermintide, you'll be happy with what you get, but for those of us who have been loyal since Vermintide, it's disappointing. On a lighter note, let's move on and talk about some environments and effects. Welcome to Atoma Prime. My name is Poncha, and I'm going to be your guide through the hive city of Tertium. If you fancy yourself a little bit of luxury, come to the throne side. You will be able to find one of our many local Gothic churches available to pray in. If you are worried about a zealot preaching to you too much, you can come and sit on one of our many park benches. Of course, we are looking to get rid of the local teens vandalising our walls with spray paint. But if you do fancy a prayer to the God Emperor at any time, we have got many altars available. Or how about you come and see a statue of one of the Emperor's warriors? You might see the odd Chaos Shrine lurking around, but I assure you, the situation is under control. Do feel free to leave your luggage with us and take a trip over the bridge to the market area. If you wish, you can walk or be carried by 4 servitors. In the market you will find such food as crab stew, I believe, but also fresh made corpse starch from a can. After you have finished, please put your rubbish in one of our local bins, and make your way to more praying, or if you wish, reside in one of our flats. Is that too expensive for you? Well, let me introduce you to the Underhive. Now, it may look like a Skaven hive, but I assure you, it is far nicer than that. We have many rooms available that go far off into the distance. Once you've picked somewhere to stay, come take a stroll down to Ragtown and visit one of the many local pubs to get some amasec with your buddies or friends. Buy some souvenirs or chat with the locals. And of course, hang up your washing to dry if you need to. Are you looking for work? Of course you are. Take a step into one of our many manufactorums. You can help build the finest Leman Rust tanks you've ever seen, and the working conditions are brilliant. I think I'm done. Darktide's environments are broken down into 5 zones, which you will cross over in different missions, and they're filled with details. You've got Easter eggs such as Skaven logos being painted around the place. Everything in the world has skulls incorporated in some way, such as generators, typewriters, doorknobs, boilers, etc. There's purity seals on ridiculous things such as fans, screens, and even bottles. Without a doubt, the scale of a hive city is truly shown, and it's a wonder to look at. There's just many things in the environment that make you stop and take a look, like statues, Valkyries being worked on, Leman Rust tanks. I do feel sorry that there's no toilet seat in 40k, you just squat. One thing Fatshark have done very well is incorporating the mission objectives into the environments, like the smelting machinery, a tower of servo skulls, or purifying a water system. The game has some brilliant lighting and colour effects on different maps that provide a nice indication of where you are. Green for the sewers and underhive, blue for the higher up levels, and orange for being outside the hive. Blood and gore effects are definitely there. There's even a nice little detail of maggots coming out of enemies being blessed by Nurgle, saliva coming off dogs, glow coming off sniper lenses, fire effects you feel the heat coming off the weapon, and the particle effects for psychers being whitish blue are very distinct to everything else in the game. I think my favourite though is seeing the sparks coming off a chainsaw hitting armour. I definitely now do it on purpose just to see the effects. Let's move on and talk about the voice acting and sound design.
The God Emperor is watching! He knows all!
Personally, I feel Darktide could have won the Bill Clinton Award for Best Soundtrack. Jesper Kyd has truly captured the essence of 40k in the music. From Imperial Advance, which literally sounds like a choir cheering on our rejects in battle, to data interference where you're having to defend an area whilst the timer's running down, and then there's the Car King disposal unit, which I was playing in the intro. There's good music in video games, and there's great music in video games. But what makes disposal unit special is it lines up with the gameplay of the player. With each swing you take at a boss, it melds with the beat, and that's why I think it deserved an award. The voice acting has definitely left its mark. You've got blood for the Emperor and skulls for the Golden Throne from the Zenith, which almost sounds heresy-like. Or limited ammo doesn't mean limited to you from the sharpshooter. And poor questions from the Ogryn like, top of hive is pointy bit, who lives there? With a huge amount of selection you get from the character creation, they've all done an amazing job. One little detail about the voice acting is depending on which one you pick, it would change the dialogue in game. For the sound effects, a chainsaw sounds like a chainsaw revving up and slowing down, especially when hitting different textures like armour and flesh. Bolters have a massive punch behind each shot, and you can hear the mechanical sound of it as you reload. Same for the flamer rotating the canister, the thunder hammer charging up, the Ogryn clubbing enemies on the head, it's perfect. One thing Fatshark have done very well, which they did in Vermintide, was sound effects for enemies. Each enemy in the game has a distinct sound to know they're coming, from the mutant's scream, the hound's howl, or a poxburster's ticking. You know what enemy is coming, which is great for player awareness and also for new players to understand. With all that being said, I'm going to round this video up. Now, I'm going to change how I review games from now on. I'm either going to talk about things that I want to highlight or they're worth talking about. As much as I like doing it, talking about the assets and animations, people don't really care about it. I'd rather just tell you what you need to know. I still will keep a similar format. On launch, I experienced the odd bug of a Grim or Tome being stuck, and the odd crash here and there, but very little after that. I do commend Fatshark that they're trying to hotfix the game, add new content, and giving players the things they didn't have on launch. But Darktide feels like a foundation of a game that we're going to have to wait a few years down the line before us Vermintide fans get the game we wanted. Giving a number like 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10, it means fuck all honestly, to players and developers. So I've invented a review bingo, which will be my new way of reviewing games. For Darktide, it's great for Warhammer veterans, and if you know the IP, you're definitely going to love this game. I wouldn't recommend playing it as a Warhammer Bambi, as it can be a tad overwhelming for new players. Even with the cutscenes they have, I feel like a game like Mechanicus would be a far better introduction to 40k. I highly recommend you don't buy the game yet, but I also recommend you don't pass it up in the future. If you've got a group of friends, it's definitely a win, but if not, I would wait for a couple of patches regardless of optimization. Darktide suffers with what a lot of games do in the gaming industry. Even after 2 delays, the game needed far more time in the oven. It would definitely be worth the money if it had all those features that Vermintide 2 took years to implement. but without it, they will just trickle in over time, and eventually we will get Vermintide 2 40k, but currently we don't, and it is a disappointment. I've got many plans for videos next year, which I'm looking forward to making. It's been Poncha, take care.
We'll snack on them all.